Good morning. I have a theory that can't be proven, but the theory is that when there's a difficult passage comes up for the reading, Rod finds a reason to preach somewhere else and asks me if I'd kindly help him out. Because I don't know about you, but I think that's a tricky passage that Amanda read to us so well this morning. Heal body, mind and spirit. So this morning I'm just going to focus in on a tiny bit of that healing, and as it relates to Elijah. Now if you're anything like me, you'll know that there are two people that you could get mixed up, and I do. I never work out who's Elijah and who is Elisha. So try and fix your mind this morning. It's about Elijah. So, question, don't answer it aloud. Have you ever experienced depression, burnout, or have you been so overwhelmed with anxiety that you could hardly breathe? Well, I've certainly been afflicted with two of those. In 2001, I had to take early retirement from full-time ministry after 30 years, and it was because of depression and burnout. I won't go into the long and complicated reasons why. It was connected with my mother was dying, my father had died suddenly, Mum had dementia, she lived in Oldham, we were having problems within the church where I was vicar, and Linda at the time was having bullying issues in the workplace. She was being bullied in the workplace, and it just seemed to me that I was like the guy that you see on television who has a load of sticks with plates on, and you started turning the plate there, and you moved around, and then I'd look over there and think, oh no, can't do it, the stick there, I need to get the plate twisted and go along. And in the end, you just fall in a heap on the floor. And it was like that for 5 years. So that may or may not be similar to yourself. But if it is, let's see what Elijah can teach us. First of all, the background to Elijah. Elijah had been on Mount Carmel in a confrontation with a very evil guy called Ahab. And Ahab's wife, they've sometimes sung about her. If ever a devil was born, it was you, Jezebel. It was you. So Jezebel was a wicked person. And there were pagan prophets involved who were up to all manner of evil atrocities. And they worshipped the Baal, who was a Canaanite pagan god, and all manner of evil practices were taking place. And Elijah had a confrontation with that God, which makes facing a congregation on a Sunday morning in the local church seem like a piece of cake. He was up against a very difficult situation. The reputation of Elijah's God was at stake. All these false prophets, all these pagan people, and Ahab and Jezebel were all saying, Elijah, your God is worth nothing. Your God is rubbish. And Elijah was saying, well, I'll prove it to you. And so I won't go into the story. You can read it yourself in chapter 18 of 1 Kings. It's all there. But in front of hundreds of Israelites, 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah that was connected with child sacrifice. Won't go any further than that. Elijah did his stuff for God. And it's no wonder that he struggled. Elijah performed a miracle which proved the existence of Elijah's God. It was a battle, a fierce conflict of evil, and God came out on top. And the false prophets were rounded up, and they were taken to the river, and they were got rid of. And all this was a great moment in Elijah's life. But he was now under intense physical, emotional, and spiritual stress. You see, the powers of darkness were challenged. He challenged not only the powers of darkness, but the political and spiritual leaders of the time. He'd proven his own ministry, and he'd proven that the power of God was real and authentic, and that God was alive and moving in his power. But you see, he'd angered the evil Queen Jezebel, so much so that she sent him a death threat. So all these powers, all these evil prophets, evil kings, Jezebel and everybody else that was on the dark side, Elijah came up against them and stood for his God. And it's no wonder that he started feeling a little bit wobbly. For example, he was exhausted. He'd given all that he could. I wonder if you've ever felt like that. Have you ever done something, especially if you've done it in God's name? You know, sometimes you can preach, can preach, and you think, do you know what, this morning I've preached my heart out. And Linda sometimes has to have a little complaint to me because I just flop on the settee. Now you'd think, well, that's not difficult. You just stood up this morning and wrote to Tolstoy and did a few bits with the old PowerPoint. But you know, sometimes we don't realise we're coming up against other than humanity. We're coming up against dark powers in dark places. Enough said. So Elijah was exhausted. He'd given all that he could. Elijah was drained. He lost all perspective on life. And when I was burnt out and depressed in 2001, I am embarrassed now to think that I went up to people and said things to them that I wouldn't dream of saying now. I'm so embarrassed. Well, I'm not now, because I put it right with them. But I said the wrong, inappropriate things to people. It's a wonder that I didn't get a slap in the face for some of the stuff that I said, which at the time I thought seemed quite rational and okay. And also, you see, Jezebel had sent Elijah a death threat. To be honest, that would scare you, wouldn't it? If you had a death threat from a queen, a powerful person. And it says in verse 3 of that passage that Elijah was afraid, and who wouldn't be, humanly speaking? All he wanted to do was escape and run away. It was not his present situation that caused the problem. He'd done that successfully. But what scared Elijah was fear and anxiety about the future. And a lot of the times, most of what we struggle with is not the present, but worrying about what might be. What I call the what-ifs. Somebody says something to you, you think, what if? Somebody does something, some situation happens, and you think of, what if? And usually, it's, if you're anything like me, a bit pessimistic, it's what if the worst possible case happens. And Elijah fell victim to fear and depression, and he was tipped over the edge by Jezebel's death threat. So for a moment, Elijah lost sight of his mighty and powerful God. His eyes went off God and onto the problems, onto the what-ifs. What if? What if I don't have enough money to pay my mortgage? What if I get some terrible illness? What if I can't pay the mortgage? What if I'm made redundant? What if? All the what if. And if you focus on the what ifs, it's very easy to take your eyes off the God who sustains you. Even if God did a miracle in front of you, it would be very easy to put your eyes on the what-ifs instead of the mighty and powerful God, and that's what happened with Elijah. And he fell victim to fear and anxiety. Now in verse 3, in the Hebrew, not that I know much about Hebrew, but this is what it says in the Hebrew. It says, Elijah sees how things are. But actually, Elijah didn't see how things were. It was his imagination worked overtime and his thinking was distorted. You see, the circumstances had made him see things out of perspective. He was seeing it in the wrong way. It all went fuzzy. And he just looked, everything, my mum used to say, it's all doom and gloom. And that's exactly how Elijah saw things. So, Elijah got up and he ran for his life and he came to Beersheba. Now, you should spot a problem there. Elijah got up and ran for his life to Beersheba. If you were listening to the reading, that's not right. Because God told him, go to the desert of Damascus. Depression and burnout can lead us into the wrong places. He didn't hear God say, go to Damascus. He just heard in his own heart, I'm going to Beersheba, and he went. And his depression and his burnout can lead us into isolation. And while he himself went a day's journey into the desert, so he was running further and further away from the purposes of God, who just worked a miracle. You'd think he'd be running to God. But my experience is that when you're in depression and burnout and anxiety, you run away from. You run into the wilderness, and that's exactly what he did. So whilst he was depressed, Elijah believed that no one could help him. And that's how it felt to me. When I was depressed, a lot of people tried to help me. And every single one of them, I pushed them to one side. And I said, no, you can't. Nothing can get through. People tried to the best of their ability. And he removed himself from the community of faith. Can you see how problematic that can be? The very thing that can support you and help you and encourage you to make a way forward, you shouldn't. Let me give you an example. When Rod was inducted into this church, these seats weren't in, but there were wooden seats, wooden pews, and they stretched to that wall. And Linda and I came, and I was depressed at the time, and Linda and I came to support Rod and Jill in the induction as vicar. And I came in at the back door. I sat in the pew on that side because it was packed. I sat in the middle of the pew. I looked around, I saw the people, and I said to Linda, I can't handle it. I've got to go. And so we just walked in, and then we got up and walked out. That's how it felt inside. I couldn't bear to be with people. And yet probably being with people might have been a helpful way forward, but it just didn't happen. It just wasn't something that I was ready for at that time. So whilst depressed, he had chaotic thinking as well that made no sense. His thinking was mixed up. It says he ran for his life, so he wanted to save his life. But then in the next bit, he says to God, take my life. He's all mixed up. First of all, he's saying, save me. And then he's saying, let me die. Which one is it? Do you want to live? Do you want to die? he didn't know whether he wanted to live or die. He was all mixed up. And quite often when we're in depression and burnout, that's how it feels. We just don't really know. 1 minute we do and 1 minute we don't. So Elijah was so burnt out that he flopped under a tree and fell asleep. So we have a picture of the darkness that surrounded Elijah. We have a sense of his depression, of his burnout and his anxiety. And Christian people sometimes might feel like that I did. Now, little concerns now, just for a second. One, sometimes Christians give advice. And sometimes I call it curtain theology. Curtain theology. And in my opinion, it's the bad advice. It's wrong. Christians will say to a person that's depressed, pull yourself together. Do you get it? Curtain theology. Pull yourself together. The last thing in the world that you can do is to pull yourself together. If you could, you would. It isn't going to happen, so don't even say it. Or other well-meaning Christians might come out with platitudes like, God knows and understands. Well, he does. Of course he does. But actually, that isn't always helpful for you when you're in depression. Or somebody might say, Jesus took our pain when he died upon the cross. Do you know what he did? The atonement is part of our healing. Jesus died that we might be forgiven and healed. By his wounds we are healed, it says in the Bible. But actually at that moment, it isn't much comfort for me to know that Jesus died on the cross for my depression, because I don't feel that he did. Everything feels black and dark. So there is a way forward. Don't leave at this point, whatever you do, or else you go home and say there was doom and gloom in the room this morning when he preached. Okay, so the first thing that God did for Elijah was let him sleep. Now today, with today's modern medicine, they popped me a packet of venlafaxine, which is an antidepressant, a very powerful antidepressant, and that began to do the trick as well. But one thing I did was sleep, sleep, sleep. And then after Elijah slept, God sent an angel, and the angel said, get up and eat. You see, God is very practical. Elijah needed strength, so God fed him. And in verses 6 and 7, there's more eating and there's more sleeping. And maybe in today's world, then maybe a bit of venlafaxine or citalopram seems to be a bit popular. Various drugs that people can take. But rest and eating, because you don't always feel like eating when you're depressed. The last thing in the world that you want is food. You just turn it off. So God nurtured him with more sleep and more food. Healing involves the body, the mind, and the spirit. There isn't time now. I was thinking of you, Ben, when I last spoke of this. I said that we are tripartite beings, three-part beings. And it's no good just looking at the body and forgetting the mind, or looking at the body and the mind and forgetting the spirit, because we all have a spiritual side, whether you like it or not, whether you're a believer or not, you have a spiritual side, and that's why it's crucial that we feed the spiritual side with the right kind of spirit, because if you feed the spiritual side with the wrong kind of spirit, then all manner of bad things can happen, because the spirit can't tell the difference, because it's spirit. It just knows that there's a spiritual dimension. So we have to feed people with the right thing, spirit, the Holy Spirit. So healing involves body, mind and spirit, and all three need to be nourished. We're nearly on the whole street. Also in verse 7, the angel says, there's mention of a journey. The angel says, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you now. Up to this point, no journey had been mentioned, only food and only sleep. Now this is good news, because now, with the mention of a journey, Elijah thought that his journey with God was over. He thought that his time with God was done. He thought it was the end, kaput, that there was no hope. And that's how you feel when you're depressed and when you're burnt out. You feel that there's no way forward, there is no hope. But here the angel mentions the possibility of a journey. But God had other ideas than to let Elijah die in the wilderness. God has a bigger plan for me than I have for myself. So Elijah got up and he ate and he drank and he was strengthened by that food. He travelled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Elijah makes the journey. He arrives, I think I flipped over too many there. Elijah makes the journey, he arrives, and then he goes back to sleep, more eating, more rest. And there he went into a cave and spent the night. So there's beginning to be hope for Elijah. God is reminding him. God didn't come to him right at the beginning and say, come on, pull yourself together, get up, curtain theology, get up, have something to eat, have something to drink, I've got a big plan for you. He couldn't have coped with it, could he? And we can't. God's gentle, God's loving. Do you know what it says about Jesus? And I love this. A bruised reed he will not break. Jesus is so gentle, a bruised reed he will not break. And when I deal in my ministry, and more so in the past, when I've been praying with people whose lives have been blown apart, that verse has always come to mind. Gentleness, care, love, mercy, compassion. And that's what God is to Elijah. So in this story of Elijah's depression, God physically restored him through food and sleep. God emotionally restored him through the promise of the future. He gave him hope, and we all need hope, don't we? Years ago, I've told you this, so I'll mention it quickly. Years ago, when Linda and I were £30,000 in debt, and I couldn't see a way forward, and the Halifax were repossessing a house that we owned almost. We were at the point of repossession. A friend of mine who's a counsellor, and she said, phone me up any time you want. So every morning at 8:30, I said, I can't face it, I don't know what to do. I was in tears. And she said, Peter, there is always hope. There is always hope. And sometimes when we feel it's hopeless, we need to be reminded there is always hope, a way forward, and there was. So he was emotionally restored with the promise of the future, and spiritually he was restored by bringing him back to a sacred place, to the place where his spirit could be recharged, so his relationship with the living God could be restored. So having been healed and restored physically, emotionally and spiritually, Elijah is ready to meet with God and in a new and powerful way. So you see, from being a great prophet and seeing the miracle of God to falling head over heels into depression, burnout and anxiety, God, the loving, living God, has turned his life around and brought him right back to where God is in control again. And Elijah can see a way forward and a future. And do you know what? 5 years ago, members of the medical profession who were doing their very best said to me, Peter, you probably will never ever be strong enough to preach and teach and work again. So this morning as I preach this message to you, it's testimony to the power of God. Even if you thought it were rubbish, I've still done it. So praise God for that. I'm going to say a short prayer, and I'm going to ask if it's identifying with you, would you in your heart share in this prayer with me? Let's just close our eyes. Father, I cry out to you, and I lift my eyes to see hope rise. I cry out to you, change the colour of my thoughts to a rainbow day. I cry out to you, blow away the dark clouds to bring your light. I cry out to you, break into my heavy heart and breathe your life into me, that I may rise to a new day, full of your light and breathing your life. Lord, I cry out to you in Jesus' name. Amen.